It's back to school for kids across the country, but with a new push for federal immigration raids, school isn't the safe place it once was.
In January, the Trump administration rescinding a 15-year policy prohibiting ICE agents from operating near sensitive locations, including schools.
Now, ICE agents are free to go to schools, churches, and hospitals. So yeah, they can walk into a school ground.
Educators say they're having to create safe passage plans for students to protect them from potential immigration enforcement actions by ICE agents.
I'm going to be out on the street right outside the school, making sure that students can get there safely.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Courageous Conversations About Our Schools. This is your host, Ken Peternick, and today we're going to be talking about a topic that's been in the news across the country for some time. It's a topic that educators and local communities are especially concerned with right now in August of 2025 as kids head back to school. We're talking about immigration. We're talking about ICE raids in schools and ICE raids away from school that affect parents and relatives of kids who are in school. Let me be clear, this is not about whether you support the country's current immigration laws or practices. It's not a Republican or a Democratic conversation. This is really a conversation about doing all we can to ensure that kids and families feel safe and that they continue to learn in schools and get that opportunity like we would want them to have. But so as you can imagine, the country's new immigration policies and the dramatic increase in ICE raids are causing confusion, anxiety, and fear in many communities. According to Thomas Dee, a researcher at Stanford University, it's led to some pretty significant increases in chronic absenteeism. Well, my guest today is Leo Tucker. Leo is an attorney from Arkansas and is the executive director and lead attorney for an organization called Aiding Survivors of Trafficking and Child Abuse, or AID, A-I-D for short. He also developed something called Preparing for ICE Raids, a guide for school and community partnerships to protect children from trafficking and abuse. We will make that guide, that free guide, available on our website where you can download it. Welcome, Leo.
Hi, Ken. Thank you for having me.
Really great to have you here. I just can't imagine a more important, timely topic to be discussing right now. As I mentioned, I think there are people, certainly in your state, but in my state, in California, people are concerned. There's a lot of anxiety. And a lot of confusion. And I'm hoping you can help us a little bit through that. I'm very impressed with the guide you've put together, and I want people to know about it. But let's just start by saying a bit about yourself, where you live, and what you're currently doing.
Okay, yeah. I live in Arkansas. I was born and raised in a village with no stoplights and no elevators called Danville, Arkansas. And that's relevant because when I was about 8 years old, Laotian refugees moved to Danville and started working in the poultry plants there. Then a few years after that, initially just men from Mexico, and then whole families. And suddenly amongst the 24 Protestant churches, there was a Buddhist temple for the Laotians and a Catholic church for the Mexican and Salvadoran immigrants, because we also had Salvadoran immigrants that had fled the Civil War in El Salvador. And so I had a really wonderful church growing up, and I was a gospel musician there, and that church was really welcoming to our new neighbors. And that sort of planted in me, I think, a seed of okay, well, I already wanted to be a lawyer, but now I want to be a lawyer that serves neighbors in these situations.
Yeah.
And so I got to college at University of Arkansas and started working at Legal Aid of Arkansas. And Legal Aid was fantastic, and I learned so much, and I worked there for 3 years. But I wanted to start my own law firm because a lot of law firms like Legal Aid, while they do fabulous work, they accept funding from the Legal Services Corporation, uh, uh, which determines which immigrants and refugees are eligible for their services and which are not. And so I wanted an unrestricted legal services organization. Every year, there's a team funded by Bill Gates that chooses 5 people with a history of public interest work to attend the University of Washington School of Law for free. And I got to have multiple breakfasts and dinners with Bill Gates Sr., the less famous Bill Gates, the famous Bill Gates' dad. And I would always say, thank you for my bicycle helmet. Thank you for my apartment, my books and tuition. And he would say, stop that, stop that. That's not my money. That's my son's money. But because of that scholarship, I was able to come back to Arkansas and have no student debt and start aiding survivors of trafficking and child abuse. And that was 10 years and 5 months ago. And this guide that you and I are going to visit about is it's the front end of the work. Normally, my clients come to me after they've survived trafficking or child abuse or whatever horrible thing that they've survived. But this is something that can preventatively, preemptively, affirmatively protect young people from the trauma and all of the physiological and psychological effects of trauma. And they're just so much more vulnerable to that if, like on the first day of school in Mississippi in 2019, their parents and caretakers are all taken at once.
Yeah, we're going to talk about how this is actually playing out on the ground because you have firsthand experience with families that have experienced this and you know what's going on. I want to start with a sort of a more fundamental question that I think has created a lot of confusion. People haven't really thought about it, but people use the term illegal immigrants, illegal aliens, and other people refer to undocumented immigrants and say that's a more accurate term, and other people say no, they're illegal. Can you just shed some light on that distinction and why it matters?
Yeah. So undocumented is a term that's preferred among advocacy groups. Legal professionals mostly would use that term. Illegal immigrant or illegal alien they're older terms. It's interesting from a legal perspective because some folks who are here may have overstayed a visa. They came with permission, but then they stayed beyond that permitted time. And so undocumented feels like the most accurate term because they didn't come illegally. There are certain immigration-related violations that are crimes, like if you re-enter after a deportation, that's an illegal entry. But really, whoever is using those terms, whichever term they're using, it tells you more about their political leanings than it tells you about anything else.
So is it true that one can be undocumented and yet not have committed a crime?
Correct. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, for example, the most sort of well-known example of that would be documented young people. So they've got something that President Obama created in 2012 called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. They were brought here as children. They arrived as children. And their presence, they entered without inspection, most of them. Entry without inspection, or EWI, entry, is the term you'll hear in legal circles. And that's a good example. And a lot of people have a little more room in their heart for folks in that category that were brought as children to the country.
So using undocumented, maybe the reason some people prefer it is that it doesn't make any assumptions about your criminal, whether you are potentially a criminal, because some people who are undocumented are not.
I've had a couple of clients, Ken, who were basically the children of GI Joes in Vietnam. And so these army folks brought these kids back and just assumed everything would be fine. And now, their children are 50 years old and can't get citizenship. It just can be super complicated. And so there's a lot of nuance there. And, I, I, I do a lot of advocacy work for veterans as well. And I think about all those little nuances that when we use terms that might be hurtful, we might really be hurting people that we really would like to support, like the children of veterans of foreign wars. Yeah.
So, Leah, would you talk a little bit about what the government's official policy is with respect to immigration, and whether the ICE agents who we hear about, who are out there apprehending people or raiding homes, in some cases schools, whether they're actually following those policies from your perspective?
A lot of my young clients who survive trafficking or child abuse survive it at the hands of white American U.S. citizens, but plenty of them survive trafficking violence from other undocumented immigrants. And those clients, most of them, want ICE to take the person who abused them and send them out of this country. There's that nuance that I think is often missed too. Often you hear "not one more" is a phrase that a lot of my immigration advocates say, or abolish ICE. And I can see where they're coming from. But I also see where some of my clients are coming from. And I want to hold space for those levels of nuance as well. And then, the most abrogated amendment to the Constitution is the Fourth Amendment, which protects against unlawful search and unlawful seizure, or it was intended to. And we had a case since, this is in February of 2025. ICE went to a trailer park in Conway. They had no warrant. They knocked on the door with this sort of scary law enforcement knock with their full forearm, and fist. And my client asked to see a warrant, and they didn't show one, and they left when she refused to let him in. But then they came back 2 hours later. And can I assume that in that intervening time, they drank a little alcohol or had other substances, and they came back and they broke the door off the hinges. And they called this single woman who's a survivor of really terrible sexual violence and a couple of kids. They've also survived terrible things into the living room. And then they saw that I was representing them. And so they apologized. They put their tail between their legs and they said, "Sorry about your door. You'll have to fix that." And so when I think about your question, I don't mean to circle the question 20 times before answering it, but I think in some cases they might actually be following the law, and in some cases they're definitely not. And unfortunately, my dad was a police commissioner, and so I don't think that all cops are bad, and I don't know what alternative there is when people are being violent toward one another, but to have some trained violent people. All this is to say, it's possible to love our neighbors and protect children's interests and do right by the Constitution all at the same time, but that's not happening consistently across the nation, unfortunately. And it wasn't under the previous administration either, but it seems to have gotten significantly worse. And again, as a nonprofit executive director, I don't want to take any political side, but the Fourth Amendment seems to be in more danger than it's ever been right now.
Yeah. Let's talk about how these ICE raids and immigration policies are playing out in schools. And I'm wondering if you can answer a very basic question. Is it legal for ICE agents to come into a school and just walk in and say, I need you to show me where I can find this student or that student because we have reason to believe that they shouldn't be in the country. Is it proper, appropriate, lawful?
Well, ICE uses a type of pseudo warrant oftentimes. They don't have an actual. The only time that something should be called a warrant if it's been signed is if it's been signed by a judge. And ICE has something that they call an administrative warrant, which they'll often flash in windows to gain access to a place, even though that administrative piece of paper carries um, no weight. It is, if you have that judicial warrant, then the Fourth Amendment protection against someone who works for the government not coming into your house no longer is a protection. School is more complicated. Um, you may have known that there was this Obama era policy called the Sensitive Locations Memo that said, okay, funerals, weddings, homeless shelters, schools. If ICE wanted to conduct some enforcement action there, if they wanted to go and take someone away, they would have had to have run it up the channels and gotten some clearance. And during President Trump's first administration, that memo stayed intact. But very early on in this administration, that memo was replaced, rescinded. And now, on the ground, lowest ranking ICE agents don't have to get permission to do that.
So I want to talk about another really important part of this issue, and that is ICE agents who go in and apprehend parents or caregivers, take them away.
Yeah.
Presumably, if they have a warrant, they're following the law. They take parents away. But I'm thinking about the 5-year-old child of the caregiver who steps off the bus and goes home, and no one's there.
Right.
I mean, that just sounds horrific to me. And even the prospect that could happen, which just sends chills up your spine. And imagine what it does to a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old who thinks, if I come home, it's possible my parents won't be here. So I'm wondering, A, does that happen with any frequency? B, is it the case that when that does happen, immigration officials do all they can to reach out to local agencies and make sure that the kids are protected and safe and are not traumatized, or lessen the trauma? I mean, in any case, if the parents aren't there anymore, it's going to be traumatic. But just shed some light on what's actually happening on the ground with respect to those scenarios I was just describing.
Yeah. A new memo came out last week or the week before. And maybe I should just say that the quickness of the policy changes it's dizzying. The new rule says that ICE no longer has to try to keep parents or guardians close to their kids. Moving them closer to their kids is optional now. And before, the previous policy allowed ICE, or required that ICE take into consideration if someone was caretaking an incapacitated adult, that had to be taken into account. And now it no longer has to be taken into account. Is it happening? Yes, unfortunately. I am on the board of a nonprofit that we do gospel music and raise money for like the homeless shelter or different nonprofits across Arkansas. And someone who works for our nonprofit just adopted 2 kids, clients of mine, whose mother was taken out of the country a few weeks ago. It's happening. Those kids had moved in with a 21-year-old uncle, and the uncle was a fabulous person, but I don't know if you've known any 21-year-olds, but they don't need to be caretaking a 13 and 17-year-old kid. Um, and so it is happening, unfortunately. And as it continues to happen, and I suspect it will continue to happen, and I suspect it will happen on a much larger scale, because maybe you saw the ICE's budget has increased significantly with this latest budget bill. Um, that sadly, our ICE raid preparation guide for schools and community organizational partnerships is going to become more relevant.
So I think what must have prompted you to write this guide is to help communities and organizations and communities prepare for anything that might happen that would put kids in harm's way or that would cause trauma, and to do all we can in a community to be able to respond rapidly if and when a child's safety or well-being, psychological well-being is at stake. So the title of the guide is Preparing for ICE Raids, a guide for school and community partnerships to protect children from trafficking and abuse. And so if we're not going to have nearly enough time to go through everything that's in it, but if you could point to a few high-level recommendations in that, I think that would be helpful. And then people can come to our website or your website, which we'll put on our website, and download the guide for themselves.
Great. So yes, it sort of grew out of seeing what happened in the wake of the immigration raids on the first day of school in Mississippi in 2019, and the complete vulnerability of the children that flowed from the ICE raid and the unprepared schools and communities. And I called a superintendent of a school district here in Northwest Arkansas and said, what if we collaborate? What if we prepare for this just in case this happens here? And he loved the idea. And so I called another church. So first I called the school, then I called a church that has a lot of resources, a lot of financial resources, and that I knew would be sympathetic to children in this situation. St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Fayetteville. And they were immediately on board too. So we started having meetings. And what we decided was that if this happens, the school will be responsible for certain aspects of the children's care. And then the community organization, in our case, St. Paul's, would be responsible for other parts of the children's care. So the school would bus the children to the church, which would have already vetted certain adults with background checks to provide safe places to bathe, sleep, eat, and be entertained and receive therapy. And the school would be there doing its very best to discern who are the safe adults that have a history of knowing and caring for this child, now that the primary caregiver of that child has been taken by ICE. My organization would also be at St. Paul's to serve the legal needs of those children, maybe preparing powers of attorney, seeing if there's anything we could do to get the children access to Medicaid, which is another sort of focus area of my nonprofit law firm, if they didn't already have it, that sort of thing. And so we're all in the same place. We all have a plan of what it's going to look like when we get there. And what I love about the guide is that it started to be adopted in Nebraska and Iowa and in California and New York. It's pretty customizable. It's pretty scalable. We have template policies, template letters that schools can send to their families. I really hope that it can prevent a lot of harm, because when those primary caretakers are gone, if there's no plan, then that's just so dangerous for um, the the just heightened exploitability factor for kids in that situation.
Is it, this could apply to law enforcement too, if parents are taken away because there's a warrant for their arrest. Is it
Mhm.
standard practice for law enforcement or for ICE officials to notify a school when they've apprehended parents? Or is that not standard practice? And I go back to the scenario I made up in my head that a 5-year-old gets off the bus from school and walks home and the door's locked, or they go in and no one's home and no
Right,
one has notified the school, the
right,
daycare, to say this child's parents are no longer here, which would then could trigger a whole series of responses like the one that you talked about. Or in some communities, even if they were informed, they might go, we have no idea what to do. We don't have a church ready with beds and entertainment and therapists and food. And
yeah,
then, I guess you call social services and someone comes and does the best they can. And I think what you're saying is it's much better to be prepared, to have a plan, to know what to do. But I'm just curious to know whether law enforcement and ICE officials, whether it's standard practice for them to even notify the school when parents are taken away or caregivers are taken away.
yeah. I don't know of any policy that there is, and I know that I was the one to notify the schools about the case that I gave you earlier of a mother of two of my young clients being taken a few weeks ago. Um, there are certainly occasions in which the school's going to find out. Like maybe you saw a few weeks ago, there was a child was being dropped off by his father at a preschool in Oregon, and ICE took him from the parking lot of the preschool. Um, in that situation, the school's going to know. But um, unfortunately, I think the hypothetical 5-year-old child in your scenario is just a real possibility. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
One thing, I don't know if I mentioned to you before, but I was elected to the county school board where I live back in November.
Mm.
And I'm pleased to say I got it with bipartisan support.
Wow.
Half of my endorsements and money came from Republicans, the other half from Democrats. The work I've done in the community in leading a project called Bridging Divides El Dorado has been done with people across the political spectrum. And when I talked about schools and said I'm interested in a high quality education for every student and lowering chronic absenteeism, making sure kids come to school with food in their stomachs, everyone said, if that's your agenda, I'm supporting you.
Good. Good, good.
So what I'm going to do is get on an agenda for a future board meeting
Mm.
and share your guide
Oh,
and
good.
urge our county, all of our 12 school districts in the county, to uh, think about adopting a plan based on
Awesome.
this resource and anything else they want to come up with. There hasn't been much that I've heard about in terms of ICE raid activity, but as
Mm.
you say, uh, let's be prepared.
Yeah, let's
And
get
and
ahead
it's
of
a
it.
cool thing to do anyway, because what it does, I think, is it pulls people together across political lines and says, we care about it. We can agree on this. We care about our children, even if we never have to trigger some rapid response. We've come
Right.
together and said we care, and we're going to agree that we're going to protect kids and make sure that they are not harmed.
Yeah, exactly. And who knows what flows even from forming the plan. You're going to find a new community organization that wants to partner with the school district or with the school, in particular school. Yeah, it could be really an important process that even if it's never needed in the way that we imagine it being needed, relationships could be built that serve your students, you know?
Yeah. That's an aspect of it, a potential benefit to focusing on this in places where it hasn't yet become a problem,
Yeah.
because it says we can come together across political lines, put our politics aside, and say we're going to work together to
Yeah.
develop a plan to protect kids.
I think that's genius.
So again, I want to encourage people to come to our website, go to your website. Again, we'll post this on our website, and it's a free guide. People can download it. As you say, it's customizable, scalable,
Yeah.
and adopt something in your own local community.
Absolutely, Ken. And we have template policies for the school districts, and depending on the political situation in each town that adopts this, it'll either be appropriate or not to do some of that. But like as you just said, it can all be modified. It can just be a skeleton that people dress in different ways.
Yeah. Well, as we draw this to a close, I want to say to our listeners that we're not done devoting time to this issue on this podcast. And if you have stories or relevant information to share about immigration practices in schools, I hope you'll get in touch with us. You'll find our contact information on our website, schoolconversations.org, and that is where you will find this and all of our podcast episodes. You can also download a copy of the guide we've been talking about today, Preparing for ICE Raids, on that website. Leo, I want to thank you for being part of this podcast and also for the incredibly important work you were doing to support kids and families in these difficult and uncertain times.
Thank you. I'm really thankful that I get to use my law degree in this way.
Yeah. Again, thank you for being with us, and thank you for the good work you're doing. So long, everyone.